I call the member for Hasluck.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise to oppose the telecommunications legislation amendment, National Broadband Networks Measures Access Arrangements Bill for 2011. And I want to commence by citing two sections out of the House of Representatives' practice. Thus, the House of Representatives is the People's House, and the inheritance of responsible government through cabinet system is the most significant characteristic attached to it. The Ministry is responsible for making and defending government decisions and legislative proposals. There are a few important decisions made by Parliament which are not first considered by government. However, the government proposals are subject to parliamentary scrutiny, which is essential in the concept of responsible government. The efficiency and effectiveness of a parliamentary democracy is in some measure dependent upon the effectiveness of an opposition. The more effective the opposition, the more responsible and thorough the government must become in its decision-making processes. And in respect to this legislation, and in particular the amendments, there is a need to consider the amendments within a proper time frame, that where the understanding of members, and I'm talking about all members in this House, is paramount in the decisions that we make. The proposed amendments are not considered from a risk-adverse process that should occur to enable all members to have an understanding of the concepts and constructs of the flow-on effects of each of these amendments. The complexity of the legislation makes it interesting in the way in which you read the proposed bills and how the interrelatedness of the amendments sometimes are confusing. What I would prefer is that we debate these within a proper time frame, allow for an understanding to occur, and for the debate to allow us to consider the amendments in the context of the current legislation, but the flow-on effect for all of our constituents. Because ultimately, as the taxpayer who pays and foots the bill for the NBN, the 50 billion is a sizable sum of money that is not and the process of the management of that money does not fall within the accountability of this parliament. It is exempt from it. On that basis, there is a dereliction of responsibility by members of this House if we do not consider each of those amendments in the level of detail required to make an informed decision. We're not blocking it. We're quite keen to continue having the discussions, but the amendments cannot be placed on a table and then expected that the decisions we make without the implications and understanding of legislation is not consistent with the outcome that is sought. So we're not blocking. It is a matter of having some of the debate that we need to have around some of the... No, Minister. What I like about the Leader of the Parliamentary House is that I love the interjections that you make when challenges become, but it's good, I'm glad that you do debate, because that's the important part of this parliament, is to debate. And you're leading to the notion that we do need to have the debates around each of the amendments in respect to the bill in its totality. And I'm sure that the parliamentary leader has a really good understanding of the interrelatedness of each amendment against the legislation, because then I would have some degree of confidence in what he is proposing. However, the majority of members do not. And I think that the debate has to go to the issue of what we represent for the constituents that we all take care of. Because our decisions extract from their pockets. And I'm pleased to see that the Leader of the House is quite happy to extract from the pockets of taxpayers and to exclude the NBN from parliamentary scrutiny. But let me also say the complex business arrangements that are required to support the legislation and the amendments need to be considered and discussed. And certainly those elements that we need to debate that are of risk have to be considered. Members of this House need to carefully examine and consider the implications of each amendment as it is applied in the context of the total legislation, and to receive them late Friday doesn't allow for that type of scrutiny, particularly in the processes that we have within this House. And I would expect that the bringing us back to debate these. It doesn't matter whether I'm new Leader of the House. It's good that I am new, because at least I get the chance to read the parliamentary procedures, to watch your behaviour, to learn from you, but also to be responsive in terms of the debates that we must have in this House. I also want to say that the efficacy in respect to each of the amendments has to be applied, because this is a far-reaching piece of reform, or significant reform. Too often, the creation of structures, particularly monopolies, can be unchallenged by ordinary Australians who experience difficulties. They can be unchallenged by businesses who have difficulty with a monopoly because they really have nowhere to go. And for it to be exempted from the FOI also makes it challenging in terms of the decision that it makes as a corporate body, because in that context it then leaves a high degree of risk in the way in which taxpayers' funding is used. We're not opposed to an effective broadband, but the model of the broadband needs to encompass not just fibre optic cabling, but the best modelling that will deliver to all Australians at all points across this nation, regardless of where people live and choose to live, to manage businesses and to enjoy the expanse of this country. I do have a concern that remote and some regional areas of Australia will not have access to the broadband in which it is purported to be provided. The late amendments are a concern because the House hasn't had the opportunity of looking at the level of detail. And on that basis, it is important that we consider the context in which we debate each of these amendments, including the opposition's amendment, that will go to the way in which this legislation is much more effective and efficient. The Senate spent a whole day discussing each of the amendments. We have been brought today to look at these at a last-minute arrangement. I would criticise. No, that's fine, Leader of the House. I don't have a problem with that. Order. I apologise, Madam Deputy Chair, for entering into debate with the Leader of the House, but he's got a very effective voice that is very soothing. And the member will ignore the interjections. No, they're very soothing. And I am captured by the words that he utters because I find it difficult to ignore them. The faster broadband is wanted by Australians, and we acknowledge that. But what we also acknowledge is there is a better way of doing it. And certainly these amendments need to be delayed so that we can look at the implications. If it wasn't taxpayers' money and it was the money from another source, then I'd have no difficulty in supporting amendments that have implications for expenditure. Order. No, look, order. No, I really do love the sound of Minister Albanese's voice. No, I'm not. Just because no one would talk to you on Saturday. Order. The member for Hasluck has the call. Actually, Leader of the House, I don't always take the full time required. I'll just make the points that are necessary. Great contribution. These amendments need to be delayed to allow the type of debate that is required and the rigour that is important. The risk management processes have to be examined because there are elements that are important in this construct. And let me say, I would suggest that the proposed amendments lay on the table to allow considered examination of each, and it allows informed debate or both. It's interesting that the Leader of the House talked about these as being stumped up, that it's not sloppy government, and that it is a delaying factor by the opposition. But our concern, and particularly mine, is that we do the right thing by Australians, that we ensure that the expenditure that we are committing to in these amendments and in this legislation doesn't compound to blow out beyond the 50 million that is referred to. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, with those points and with my enjoyable interaction with the Parliamentary Leader of the House, I conclude my comments and oppose the tabling of the amendments.